I have a few housekeeping items before we get started, and that is that this webinar is being recorded and the recording link will be emailed to all attendees. That this presentation is an educational service by Alcorn Immigration Law, and the information discussed should not be construed as legal advice for any specific action. And please be sure to consult a knowledgeable professional with assistance for your particular issue. And lastly, please submit any questions you may have using Zoom's Q&A function anonymously. And it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our CEO and founder, Sophie Alcorn, and our Chief Legal Officer of Excellence, Lynda Hagerty.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for the intro. Hi, Lynda. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Sophie. How are you?
I'm great. Lovely to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Lynda is one of our busiest, most sought after professionals at the firm. So I feel lucky that I get an hour of her time to share with all of our audience members today. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get started. As Alex mentioned, this will be recorded. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A panel. It's not anonymous unless you set your name to be anonymous. So it's all, this is not any sort of privileged or confidential information. So keep that in mind when asking questions. And yeah, we appreciate you being here today, and we'll try to take questions throughout. So feel free to chime in. By way of background, I'm Sophie Alcorn. I write the TechCrunch column called Dear Sophie, Ask Sophie. And I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law, and I'm joined by my wonderful, brilliant, esteemed colleague today, Lynda Hagerty, who's, really puts her heart and soul and decades of experience into helping all of our startup clients grow and scale in the United States.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm excited to be here today and dive into this topic.
You're welcome. And just to paint a picture of your areas of breadth and expertise, and we'll be going into this more today with the subject matter of the webinar, but I would say you really help our scaling startups that have probably already raised some form of capital. They have US operations and they're ready to hire and grow within the US.
That's exactly right. So we look at what the visa options are for them and for the workers that they want to bring here to the US. So that's a big part of what I do.
Yeah, and today we'll be talking about how to bring workers who are both inside the United States and working at other tech companies, but also outside of the United States, maybe at different offices for your business. And so let's just dive into it. And to our listeners, Lynda and I could talk about this for years. We've done it for years. The subject matter, we can you can go down into any rabbit hole you want here and talk about it for days. So this is going to be conversational, in plain English, high level overview, just to kind of chat about some of the main questions that founders and operators face when trying to figure out, like, do I go to Silicon Valley? Do I do market expansion in the US? Should I raise money in the United States? Because we're interacting with people all the time from all over the world that are in that situation. Either they've raised money in Europe, or they're attending an accelerator or an incubator, maybe as a visitor. Maybe they have many of our clients have a thriving business in India, and they're looking at expanding to the US to raise venture capital, or like in Italy, and they want US market access. So there's a lot of reasons why people might be looking at this. But like, what would you say? You get a call from somebody and they're like, I think we need to expand to the US. What do we need to think about super high level from an immigration perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things is really the timeline. When do you want to be here in the US, so that we can help you map out, what that visa process looks like, and when we want to start any kind of filing. So a lot of the visa processes that we're going to talk about are 2 steps. So you have to file something with USCIS in the US, and then you have an embassy appointment abroad if you're outside the US.
So this leads to all sorts of chicken and egg types of situations for people, right? I think the kind of the most challenging is I'm not sure I want to move to the US, but if I had a visa, I would want it because then it would allow me to raise money or expand operations. But that's really not the right way to tackle this, is it?
Yeah, I think you have to really know what the longer term plan is, because that's really going to tie into the best visa category for you. Because there's
Okay.
a lot of considerations, like you may need to be on the US payroll for certain visa categories. So there's a lot of analysis that has to happen.
So maybe maybe we can put it into different buckets even. Like maybe if you are a startup founder and you have like a quality of life issue in your home country, and you're like, I don't care, I just need to move to somewhere with safety and freedom where I can conduct business without bribery and corruption, and I can like go outside freely and exercise my beliefs. I would say that's probably a different group of people than we really love our like Northern European, banking system and climate, and we have a wonderful home, and right. So
Yeah.
probably different. And so you need to be clear when talking with Lynda or myself or one of our other attorneys at the firm of, it's like, why are you doing this and how motivated are you? Is it like, I have to do this for my personal sanity and my spouse and my kids and our quality of life, and we're doing this come hell or high water. So we just have to figure out which business case is most effective for getting it done versus, I'm going to test the market. My life is pretty good. I want to see if we can raise funding if I'm in San Francisco going to AI parties with VCs. It's very, very different.
It is. And there are like temporary categories like the B1, B2 visitor, which you could for 10 years. And that gives you flexibility to kind of make those decisions and spend some time in the US.
Yeah. And I've noticed a shift too, because I often speak at accelerators and incubators and also country specific trade programs that have like batches and cohorts that come to California. So recently I was at Swissnex and the German accelerator, and Innovate, the new Italian program, and Advantage Austria, and just like making all the rounds. And there's groups from Japan and Korea and New Zealand and all these trade, because lots of countries are very interested in helping founders from their economies expand in the US, and and likewise help US founders expand to other parts of the world. But I noticed a shift recently because like Switzerland is an amazing country. If you were born in Switzerland and you have a Swiss passport, like you're pretty good, right? But I noticed a shift with the Swiss founders who I met with recently, where before they were like, look, we just need our ESTAs and our B1, B2. We're just here to participate. Maybe like depending on their vertical, meet some like biotech or pharma corporate venture capitalists or something. But like really they're expanding in Europe. But for the first time, they're like, oh, we touch on AI. We heard there's all these parties. There's Tech Week. We think we need to be in the room. Like we thought we could raise on Zoom in the pandemic, but now the pendulum of trust is shifting back to in person. And that's another thing, like Silicon Valley has been asleep for the last 4 years physically. And like I've gone to Texas and New York and different places, and there's no masks and people are just going about their normal business. And they're like, what pandemic? That never happened. But in California, everybody's been taking a very conservative approach. It's a different culture and political climate. And so I would say that like just now are there parties in San Francisco again, and conferences and networking and lunch and learns and free swag and this stuff that used to be so abundant in 2019. But it's changing the expectations of investors, because if you can go down the street and hang out with somebody and build trust relationships and have coffee and stop by and see them at that thing, and then you bump into them again at the other thing. It was really lovely that Zoom seemed to equalize the playing field for fundraising. But I think it's important that if you want to raise money from Silicon Valley VCs. I think the cultural landscape around that is changing again. And so being here either temporarily on a fact-finding mission or permanently may have a lot of value.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's really interesting to hear about that shift, though. I mean, I'm on the East Coast. You're on
Yeah,
the West Coast, right?
Yeah.
So it's different. You know, I feel like we're already there. We're a lot
you
more.
guys were like out of it years ago, and you're
More
like, we don't
pandemic,
know.
yeah.
And I'm like, I can't go outside. Yeah, it's really different. Also, I think it has to do here with all the tech companies and like whether they were gonna, like they had to force people to go back into the office a couple days a week, and everybody's resisting, and it's been a big thing here. So so thinking about the reasons why, is it a personal reason? Is it because you want to raise money from US VCs specifically? Is it because you're developing, I did a podcast that'll come out in a couple of weeks on immigration law for tech startups. And my guest, Sean Flynn, is the host of the Silicon Valley podcast. And we were chatting about when do you expand your user research, like if you know you want to sell your product in the US eventually, should you conquer the Czech Republic first and then come here after that, or what? And his opinion was, no, if you want to sell, if you want US market access, like build your product in the US. It's so much easier to build for the American market than to try to pivot your product later and what users want. There's so many cultural and like user and buyer differences. So what you're going to build for one country in Europe, and then you have all the localization problems as you scale in Europe. His argument was the US is a great market. Just come here, talk to US users, build for the US. The sooner you can do it, the more money you'll save in the long term and the faster you'll go. There's all sorts of different reasons to come here. So can you just, and I've been rambling, but what's the difference between ESTA and B1, B2, and who can get it and how can you use them? If you just want to visit and check it out.
Yeah, so there's the list of countries that US offers the visa waiver program to. I don't know if it's 24, maybe it's 42. I might be flipping my numbers.
Changes, but something.
Yeah, so there's a list, a lot of like European countries and countries that we have very friendly relationships with allow individuals to come in under this ESTA, which is essentially a business visitor or visitor for pleasure without actually having a visa stamp in your passport. So you can come into the US for 3 months at a time, you get admitted, and then you do have to depart at the end of your ESTA period. You can't change status or extend your stay. Yeah.
Unless you magically randomly fall in love with a US citizen, which you can't plan on doing before you get here.
3 months is a short time, but it's like a reality TV show.
Yeah.
So the ESTA is a really nice flexible option. You do have to apply for the ESTA status.
Yeah.
So there is a process, and then it's valid, I believe, for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then the B1, B2 visa is an actual stamp in your passport. So individuals that aren't from ESTA countries, that's really their route that they need to go to come into the US as a business visitor or even a tourist.
Yeah.
So they have to go through that physical stamping process at the embassy abroad.
And because travel is just now opening up, I think this is the first time since we started working together that I've asked you this, but how do you generally advise individuals on how much time they can spend inside the US on ESTA and B1, B2, and how frequently they can come in, or how long do they need to be gone? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the government is going to look at the US CBP when you come in on either ESTA or B1, B2. They're going to look at your pattern and frequency of travel. So are you coming in once a quarter for business meetings? That might seem reasonable. You come in for a week or month. But if your duration of stay is extensive and it keeps increasing, they might look at that pattern and question you and say, we think you're not coming in for permissible B1, B2, or ESTA activities. You're coming in to perform productive work. So that's when you could be challenged at your US admission, and they could send you back home.
Right. And so things to look out for are, like, don't stay on ESTA 89 days and then try to go to Mexico for 1 day and then come back in, right? And
Right.
be mindful of what's on your social media. If it says that you are the CEO of a US company, then you could be accused of coming here to work. If you're the founder or an owner of a US company, or if you're employed at a company abroad, makes more sense of why you'd be here on a business trip. So
Mhm.
it's these things to pay attention to. And my kind of thing that I came up with, but I don't know, it's not a law. It just seems like maybe it works for people, is to just to try to spend less than half of the time in the US. So like if you're going to be here for 2 weeks, maybe be gone for 3 weeks and then come back another 2 weeks and then be gone 3 weeks. Or if you're going to be here for 5 months, try to be gone for 7 months or something like that.
Just
But
sort of some kind of balance, really.
some kind of balance. So when they
Yeah.
look back and they're like, oh, in the past 6 months, well, you spent less than half the time here. Then you're like, yeah, I have a life outside. I have to keep going back. So that can help. So, okay, primary immigration considerations. So, I mean, I think my list would be, you probably need a US business. So you got to figure that out with your corporate lawyer. You got to know who wants to be moving here and what they're going to do and how long they're going to spend. And if they have a spouse and kids, and if you're going to sponsor them for a green card one day. And you should probably, you need to know their job description. I know that sounds really silly, but we help a lot of startups where people are wearing a bazillion hats and it's all the roles are undefined. And we kind of have to be like, okay, like, let's figure out a job description and duties because the government will need it.
Yeah, it can be challenging to fit in a box. Some people
Yeah.
like that are doing everything in the beginning. So
Yeah. But if you have a general purpose of like, I am coming to research users and sell to corporate clients, or I am coming to raise venture capital funding and oversee US marketing, or I am coming to set up a sales office where we're going to hire people in Iowa to answer phones and do our outbound sales. Like they're all very different and all of them are okay, but we need to know your business plan so that we can help direct you towards what visas you might qualify for.
Definitely.
Are there any really common types of job categories, like job title buckets, that people doing US expansion typically go for? I think of like a sales engineer, or maybe like a managing director North Americas or something.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of like operations manager, director. I mean, obviously, we've got our CXO roles as well.
Yeah.
CTOs are really common.
Yeah, we help a ton of founders do.
Yeah.
A lot of startups, it's the founders. They don't have like a sales manager who's coming or something. It's like the founders who are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so we're thinking about doing this. Another really big question that everybody has is, great, so can I move there tomorrow, please? And when can I start working? So realistically, what are some of the timing considerations?
Yeah, I mean, so, when we start to look at visa options, some of them do align with certain timeframes. So, for example, we have, if you're looking to come through an H-1B, that's the professional work visa where the first time you apply, you have to go through the lottery system. And that requires you submitting a registration in March. You'll find out April 1 if you were selected. And then you wouldn't actually start on that H-1B visa until October 1. So that's kind of a funny, very sort of time specific visa category that we could explore. There are other time considerations as well, because any kind of visa process, as I mentioned before, can often be 2 steps where you have a petition filing in the US and then you have a adjudication at the US Embassy. So, and I know, Sophie, you and I also talked about, VCs and when they do like to raise funds.
Yeah. We generally see that people actually get cash in late spring and mid fall. And I think that all the VCs kind of go on vacation in July and everything is very quiet in August, but people are trying to schedule meetings for September. And then they're trying to get term sheets and close rounds in October and November and wrap everything up before Christmas. And then there's like a second mirror image wave of that happens in spring, and you can kind of tie it to like the YC demo days, sort of. It's like the raising happens after those time periods. So like if a founder needs to be here to raise from VCs in fall, which I would say is before the American holiday of Thanksgiving, which is typically around, it's like the third Thursday in November. So that's typically around November 20th to 25th. You kind of want to have all your money raised by then. And so if you wanted to be here to raise money and have those meetings in fall, you either need to get ESTA or a B1, B2 and plan to be here and only doing like negotiations and meetings for the fall. But if you're actually needing to work and you want a US entity and you're going to raise money into it and you want to start paying yourself and you want to start selling your thing here and working with US customers and all of that, you probably need to get a work visa now. Because it can take many months. And if you know, like, okay, like you would be on time for this webinar today if you're like, January of 2024 is when we're going to establish our US operations and move here, then like you are right on time to start the work visa process right now. And we're going to be talking about what those work visas are, but the point is it takes a while. And yes, you can do it if you're here on B1, B2, you can change statuses inside the US, but a lot of our clients really need freedom of mobility and they need to be able to hop on a plane and go back home or go to some conference or, you know, go to Dubai and like, oh God, what if SoftBank wants to meet with me or something? Like you need to be able to get on an airplane and come back and forth. And so finally, we're seeing that you can get real visas in your passports again. And anyway, it takes a little bit longer though, if we're doing it outside that process, outside the United States through consular processing, rather than a change of status, which would kind of keep you stuck in the US until you can secure a visa appointment. Great. And I see questions starting to come in. So thank you so much. We'll be talking about those as we go. So let's see. Here's another really important update. And this has changed even as of last week. So Lynda, just overview, like where are we at with COVID now and getting visas and traveling and vaccination requirements and all of that?
Yeah, so like from a visa perspective, I would say that things have improved substantially in terms of the backlogs. You know, I was listening to a Department of State call last week and they mentioned that 12 US consular posts have 90% of the visa backlogs right now.
Wow.
So it's very concentrated at certain embassies. So you're going to see a lot of movement now at very many, you know, most of the embassies, you'll see a lot more movement. You won't see waits that are 6 months. It might be days or weeks to get your visa appointment, which is wonderful.
And if you're from a place that's severely impacted, like Lagos, Nigeria, or maybe some of the Indian consulates, I think it then becomes just like, okay, can I go to a third country? Can I go to another consulate within my country? And you kind of have to fly somewhere for that appointment. And then you would need, if you're like going to Lesotho or something, you would need to make sure you have the right visa to get in there while you're waiting around. And you have to make sure that the US consulate will actually like help in that scenario, like a Nigerian citizen who's just visiting that country.
Yeah, and it's really like a case-by-case basis. So, you know, people ask me, where can I go? We have to actually look at the embassy website page and see if it will tell us
one by one.
Yeah, I mean,
it's on your country of birth, citizenship, residence, they can all have different requirements.
Right.
I wish it was simple, like go to Jamaica, but it's not. So
yeah.
Okay, great. And then I mean, this is a little bit outside of immigration, but high level. What are some of the things that might be different about hiring people or immigration sponsorship in the US compared to what they may have experienced in other countries?
So, I mean, I think the difference is with the US, I mean, we do have a lot of regulations and some of these regulations are very old, right? So a lot of them don't take into consideration remote work and sort of the current climate. We haven't really caught up with that. So a lot of times when people are coming into the US and they want to establish operations here and hire foreign nationals, most of the time they're going to have a physical office space. And that might be like a WeWork or some kind of co-working space.
So we're going to talk about the E2 visa and the L1 visa in a few minutes, but in general, is it enough to get like a virtual subscription to just be able to go use a hot desk for like $100 a month? Or like, what's the minimum type of office that somebody would need to set up to comply?
I mean, there could be a site visit from the government. So ideally, you really want a dedicated workspace. It would be nice if you had, 4 walls and a door.
Yeah.
But if you could just have a dedicated office, a desk, let's say, that could work as well.
Okay. Some of my startups have had site visits in the past, and they were so good at following my instructions. They had a printed public access folder with the receptionist at the front desk that they were able to show the inspector, and the receptionist chit-chatted about the company and how great they were. And it went really smoothly. But you could imagine an immigration officer stumbles into like some Santa Monica WeWork and is like, hey, where's, social media Bitcoin AI startup incorporated? And the receptionist is like, I don't know. They have a desk. Oh, let me look them up. Oh yeah, it looks like they maybe came once here. Like, it would be so much better to be like, oh yeah, they have an office there. And then if they peek in, there's like a sign on the door, and there's desks where people clearly come work out of. I mean, that being said, we can set up visas so that people can work from home and work remotely. But when the government is determining if a company is legitimate, one of the things that's just like historically, companies had offices. And so adjudicators are very comfortable recognizing the authenticity of a company when they have an office. I mean, we've even had a top VC invested like $10 million into one of our startup clients. And it was the first visa they got for somebody. It was an H-1B. And they hadn't put anybody on payroll yet, and they didn't really have any expenses yet, because this was like the critical hire that could build the company. We got an RFE of like, so what, you have $10 million of runway. Are you a real company? And we're like, actually, yes, this is a premier VC company. This is a Stanford person. Da, 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 da. So we just have to make it very clear that you are.
I almost feel like they're checking boxes sometimes too, so like, they don't really see the big picture. So I think if you can get that physical office, you're going to drastically reduce the risk of a RFE or, a challenging site visit.
And it doesn't have to be an office. Look, biotech companies need wet labs, and companies selling physical goods might need warehouses, and maybe you need like 3D printers and robotics laboratory, right? So it doesn't have to be a WeWork. It should make sense for your business.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah. There's flexibility there.
The other thing I would say is that, and we're not employment lawyers, we just do immigration, but just keep in mind that it's a lot easier to fire people in the US than it may be in countries like Europe. But on the other hand, like, people can sue you for anything in the US. So it's really great. Like, we have wonderful attorneys who we work with for corporate law and employment law. And it's really good to assemble a whole team to advise you so that you can make sure you're on the right track as you grow your company in the US, because there's a lot more you'll need to do than just immigration to set things up. All right. Next up. Okay, let's talk about the L1. So this is one of the main visa categories that people can easily use for US expansion. So what is an L1 visa, Lynda?
So an L1 is for an intra-company transferee. So the L1 visa allows individuals that have worked for 1 full year for an entity abroad. They can transfer to a related US entity. And that related US entity has to be a subsidiary, affiliate, parent, or branch of the foreign entity.
Okay. So common case studies or common fact patterns would be, let's just say some examples that come to my mind. The founders were in Estonia, they created a Delaware C corporation on Stripe Atlas. They have some US sales. Maybe they created a subsidiary in Estonia, and that's where they're getting their paychecks from. And now they want to transfer to San Francisco and run the operations here. So that's one example. Another, maybe there's a German GmbH incorporation in Germany and Berlin, and maybe they raised pre-seed from European VCs and were in a European accelerator. But now they're getting ready for their Series A, and they're realizing, hey, we really need to be in the US. So they're coming here to fundraise, and they want to raise like $1 million or $5 million seed round or Series A. And the US investors are like, hey, we need you to do this thing called the Delaware flip, because we want to put money into the account of your US company, and we want that to be a parent company. So then you need to do this corporate maneuver to buy out the shareholders of the German corporation and get the equity in the US company properly distributed. So an L1 would work in either of these scenarios. I mean, it could also be just like, hey, we're in Israel and we have this AI security company and we want to sell to defense agencies. And so we need a sales office in Washington. So we're just going to create a subsidiary. So there's a lot of ways this could go, a lot of corporate setups that could work.
Yeah, and there is specifically a new office L. So if the office is US office is, just recently opened, hasn't been in business for 1 year, the government's carved out this category for 1 year L1 to show, that you're going to grow US operations, and then you can renew that L1 sometimes up to 7 years.
Yeah. And maybe that makes sense to put in the context of giant multinational tech companies use the same visa to transfer large amounts of employees from Cupertino or, Mountain View to Switzerland to Singapore, right? And so it can be very streamlined at that level when you scale. We just got a blanket petition approved for one of our clients, so now they can move 10 people to their US office really easily. But the government also tries to make this accessible for small early stage companies. So the main thing is you've got some sort of shared ownership and control between some foreign company and a US company. A lot of variation there, that's okay. And the people you want to hire have been legitimately paid as employees for at least 1 year out of the last 3 years back home. Doesn't have to be in their home country. And then it can get weird and sticky, right? Like, what if the founders are from some country where, as a director of their company, they're not allowed to be on payroll, right? So then it gets into weird evidentiary things, but we have other ways to prove it. But ideally, it would just be a simple transfer of an employee from a foreign office to a US office.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's great. You can get a visa. It's relatively quick. We can use premium processing. They're likely to get the visas and the passports quickly after we get the USCIS approval. You can come at an early stage. You can stay for several years. Oh, it's a dual intent visa. So it's okay if you want to start a green card right away, or if you've already started a green card, your spouse can automatically get work permission when you arrive now. So this is
the payroll
really great option
for foreign. Yeah, I mean, it's so flexible. You could be an intermittent L if you spend less than 50% of your time in the US.
Yeah,
you have no time maximum. So you could do that. I've done that for CEOs that will come back and forth for 10 years.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So this is really great. Like a lot of if you're in our Alcorn orbit, we do a ton of stuff on O1s for founders. And that's usually for people who are like still in school or don't have commercial success yet. But you can just bypass all of that if you already have operations and you're expanding with an L.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I always tell people is really important that you spend that 1 year outside the US, because if you're trying to start your US operations, you're going to be coming back and forth. But we look at that 1 year of employment abroad. So if you come back and forth 3 months, then it's going to be 15 months of employment abroad, because we've got to subtract that time out.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we sort of talked about this, but can you just explain briefly the two different variations of L visas and who qualifies for each?
Sure. So the L1A is for managers or executives. So what that means is they have to be in either a managerial role abroad or executive role, and they could be in the same role in the US or a similar role. And manager could be a people manager, that's ideal. Sometimes we do functional managers, those can be more challenging. The benefits to the L1A manager or executive is that they can get up to 7 years of L1 time, where the L1Bs only get 5 years. And they also have a fast track pathway to a green card. So they can qualify, and we'll probably touch on this later in the presentation.
Yeah.
But you basically skip the whole perm labor certification and you go right until the final stages of the green card process. And you get qualified under the EB1 category, which is a much faster track than most other categories.
For startups, I think we get most CEOs or CTOs through on L1As. Sometimes we've had things like a sales engineer ends up, they didn't actually manage anybody or any processes in Europe. And so get them over on like an L1B for specialized knowledge scientists. But specialized knowledge could be a lot of things, right?
Yeah, specialized knowledge is really anyone who has some kind of subject matter expertise of the company's processes, products, services, and that they gain that knowledge abroad. They've worked at least a year abroad, and now that knowledge is needed in the US.
Yeah. So if you have a company with operations and employees set up abroad already, this is a wonderful, wonderful visa. And we would love to help you get them for yourself and your team. If you're just setting up operations in the US for the first time, is there any sort of minimum investment that a parent company would need to make to get things established in the US?
I mean, I think we would have to have some money in a bank account, essentially, just to show they could pay them the wage that's being offered.
I've done like a WeWork and like $100,000 in the US bank account showing that they can buy some computers and get the people on payroll and pay for benefits and things like that while they're ramping up sales.
Yeah, I mean, and they see that the foreign entity has money as well. So there's that corporate relationship. So that kind of helps to bolster the case.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, let's compare it. So there's this other visa, e-visas, and those are for people investing and starting new US companies and people doing substantial trade between the US and their home country. So can you kind of like compare and contrast how the e-visas who they might be good for and how they compare to the L, please?
Sure. So the E2 visa is really for investors, often co-founders who have made a substantial investment in the company, and they're looking to come to the US to start up the US operations. So, it's a great visa category for those co-founders. There's some things that you have to meet, some qualifications, and one of them being that the nationality of the company has to match the individual's nationality, and that country has to be on the list of e-treaty countries recognized by the Department of State.
So this doesn't work for India or Brazil or China. Mexico, Japan, Germany, Italy, New Zealand, Australia, they all have treaties, but it's sort of random because some of it is like an accident of history of, if XYZ country signed a treaty with the United States in 1852 or something. So and it can be helpful if you're investing into a US business and the person in question has not worked for you for a year outside of the United States.
Exactly.
And then all the other random things like a German car company in Detroit that has an E set up for their company, and then there's like some German graduate of MIT who they want to hire on an e-visa, and that person never worked for them in Germany, but they are also German, and so they can get them an e-visa as an essential employee to work for them. So yeah, the timing is also can also be an issue. I think that's why we prefer L's as well, if people can qualify. I would say one of the main issues with getting an E2 multiple entry visa in your passport is that you have to get it adjudicated by your consulate in your home country. You can't go to a third country to get it, and they don't respect USCIS's local determination. So I have seen those adjudications, pre-pandemic take 3 to 9 months, but I think they're still backlogged in many situations right now, right, Lynda?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's definitely some improvement, but there is still a wait of months, not weeks,
Okay.
like many other visa categories.
Yeah. So it's a little slower. So this would be like, okay, the person's not extraordinary and you have the right citizenships and they've never worked for you before, then this would be worth considering.
Definitely.
And then here we, go, there's the E1 is for trade and the E2 is for investment, usually a couple $100,000 minimum. Okay, so this is more just like gloss and color. And I would say the question is, do I need a US company to raise money from US VCs? And I'll take this one. I think it's helpful. And I mentioned that sort of pendulum swing of the culture of trust. It's like VCs want to deploy their capital in the lowest risk, most surefire investment possible. So if they're looking at 2 founders in the same generative AI for medical space, and one of them has a US company and one of them has a foreign company, they're human, their bias is towards simplicity. They're probably going to invest in the US company. They're probably going to invest in the founder who they're with face to face, right? Now, that being said, I've seen, Series B, Series C startups in Europe, London, Berlin, that are raising money from US VCs into the European company. And some major VCs have established European investing offices specifically for that purpose. But it depends. And a lot of VCs are structured with the rules of how the limited liability partnership is set up. So some of them only permit investments into like Delaware C corporations, for example. So I think it just depends on who your ideal investor is, how much you're trying to raise, what stage you're at, and where your market is, which is all part of a business plan. And then, immigration, we can support you on the way, but you have to know where you're going for us to be able to help you get there.
Definitely.
Let's do a word about green cards before we go to Q&A. And if you all have questions, please do add them to the Q&A panel so we can try to answer as many as possible. And can you walk us through, let's say somebody has come here on an L1 manager visa as the CEO of an early stage startup. What are their green card options?
Yeah, I mean, I think for that scenario, as long as they were a manager abroad or CEO abroad, then we could explore this multinational manager, which is essentially a fast track green card for L1s, where you can just demonstrate that you want them to be in this managerial executive position full time, and the company is seeking to sponsor them for a green card. So the proof and the evidence is similar to what you would provide for the L1 filing. It would just kind of focus on the fact that the role continues to be managerial and will be long-term. And it's a great green card category.
It's really amazing. And I would say, I don't know if you had this experience, this is before we started working together, but in the Trump administration, when they were really being tough on L1 temporary work visas, it was actually really easy to get EB1C multinational manager green cards. In some ways, the green card is easier than the visa, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's such a funny category. I love L1s. I think I've told you this before. I mean, it's just there's something about it. It's such a dynamic category, and it's attainable. you know, and so that's what's important. But when I do cases for new L1 transfers, I say, you know, let's wait 6 months before we file for the green card. Let's get some more evidence of the business activity so that we can build a strong case, and you being in the executive or managerial role.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't pull the trigger on it day one when you come into the US. I'd probably give it a little time.
Okay. But that can be really great for busy founders, because then they don't have to do the whole song and dance of the extraordinary ability categories. And it doesn't matter if you're writing articles in Forbes or TechCrunch or judging hackathons or getting awards. Like, you can simply run your business and grow the business, and you don't have to try to qualify for extraordinary ability or a national interest waiver. And it all comes down to having a growing business in the US with that requisite relationship to a foreign company, and then having worked abroad for at least a year out of the last 3 years.
Right.
Okay. And this is one of the finer points, but maybe you can clarify it. If the person worked for 1 year, let's say they worked, what is it right now? It's May of 2023. So let's say they worked for the German parent company from May of 2020 to May of 2021. So that's 1 year within the last 3 years, and they get their L1 visa today, and they come here. And then in 6 months, can they qualify for the EB1C, even though they only have 6 months out of the last 3 years where they were employed in Germany? Oh, we lost her. Okay. That'll be a question for Lynda when she gets back. And Alex, if you can help me check on her, I would appreciate it. Okay, that'll be our Lynda in the hot seat question when she returns. Okay, but I think the answer is it's okay. But I actually want Lynda to respond. Okay, so then another question is, to what extent do we need to work with US lawyers and other US professional advisors? And we've alluded to this: get a good business attorney, corporate attorney, get a good employment attorney. There's a lot of services that will help you with the setup for this. But speaking of services, I do want to clarify something very important, which is that if you are employing people through what is nicknamed a global PEO, so there are these private companies that will allow you to hire contractors in other companies. Welcome back.
Sorry about that. My internet was being naughty.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll get back to that question in just a second, but I just wanted to share with everybody how important it is that if you're using a global remote type PEO to hire contractors in another country, and so like you pay this company to employ them locally, I don't think that relationship qualifies for an L if you're doing it through your company. You would have to work with your global PEO provider for them to try to do the L transfer from their subsidiary in that home country to their subsidiary in the United States. So if you know, like, let's say you have 5 developers working for you in Bogota, Colombia, and you've had them in a remote PEO service to where they are employees of this company that you're paying to employ them. You're not going to be able to transfer them to your San Francisco office after a year unless that PEO company does it for you, and they still work for the PEO company when they get to the United States. So if you know you want to lay a path to transfer them and actually work for you directly one day, you ought to think now about creating a subsidiary there to employ them for a year first, or, you know, putting them in the H-1B lottery, or trying to get them O1 qualified, or doing an H-1B without the lottery. But that's just an important thing to note for L visas. The thing I was asking you, Lynda, and I don't know if you caught the whole question, but it's essentially like, if we fast forward 6 months and this person wants an EB1C, but now within the last 3 years, they only have 6 months of employment outside at the parent company within the last 3 years. And I actually just don't know the answer I'm asking you,
So,
because
no,
I'm
it's
curious how this
interesting.
works.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I try to tell people, it's like that time gets frozen. So if you come over on the L and you had that qualifying 1 year, I think you said May 2020, May 2021. So that kind of is a frozen time period. So that's that one, and you came over as the L, you can use that for a future multinational
Okay.
manager case.
Okay, that was
One
my
thing
gut instinct, but it's
Yeah.
always been like,
I know, because we read
gotta
these
file it.
regulations and they don't make sense. The one caveat I will say is that to become a multinational manager, you have to have worked for 1 year in a managerial or executive capacity. So let's say you have a top software developer and you bring them over, they're an L1B abroad, they're just doing specialized knowledge work. You transfer them to the US, you want them to manage the development team. Now, they were a specialized knowledge role abroad, they're manager here, they cannot qualify for the EB1C. You have to be a manager or executive on both sides, abroad and in the US, to meet the criteria.
Okay. Okay, great. Oh, good. And I see more questions coming in. So this is wonderful. So let's go to our questions for the experts. So we've been talking about L1s. Let's take this question first.
Sure.
An executive applied for an L1A visa from our wholly owned subsidiary to our parent tech startup in San Francisco. That executive was rejected. Is it worth reapplying? Oh, it sounds so frustrating. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I would say reassess the case, because I think that, we can make a strong case. It's really all about the evidence. What I'd say is different in the last 10 years with filing L1s is that, the employer can put together a support letter and say how wonderful this person is and who they're managing. But if you don't have evidence to support that, you don't have copies of performance reviews, you don't have copies of org charts, job descriptions for direct reports, they can deny those cases.
Yeah.
So it's really an evidence-based filing.
Yeah. And not every law firm might understand tech startups and the type of documents that we know you have that can build a paper trail to prove your legitimacy. So we might be able to help reapply and bolster the evidence. And also we had a success story where I think the guy did an L1 twice with other lawyers and he couldn't do it. It just kept getting denied. And we ended up pivoting and helping him with an O1. And so now he's here running the company. So, but yeah, Lynda's an L1 whiz and expert. So we would love to help you reassess, and we'll provide our contact information shortly. Maybe Alexis, you could put that in the chat window as well. Okay, and so then our next question would be about B1 visas. What are the common not doable things under a B1 visa? For example, getting a CEO title and hiring employees. Oh my God. I wish I could actually tell people some rules that were real government rules, but everything I write about in TechCrunch, it's all it's probably okay, it's probably not okay, but it's so nebulous. So the main thing is you're not allowed to work in the US on a B1. You're allowed to come for education, for trade, for meetings, for customer requirements, for conferences, for talks, for negotiations, for board meetings, but you're not supposed to be working here. And different attorneys interpret this differently. So my interpretation is that there's some old case from, I don't know, the 40s or the 60s in immigration law that basically says, what is work? Work is doing any sort of labor or services in the hope of future payment. And during the pandemic, I was even doing research that digital nomads doing work for foreign companies while couch surfing in Airbnbs in the US, even that might be unauthorized employment. So I don't want to scare you, but I mean, I think, look, if you're the CEO of a UK AI startup and you want to stay here longer than 3 months, and so you get a B1 visa because you don't want ESTA, and your LinkedIn says that you're the CEO of this British company, but you're going to establish US operations and get ready for an L1 or an E2. My opinion, Lynda, would be if you say, hey, I'm here on a business trip, And then you sign the WeWork lease and buy the computers and hire somebody to manage the people here while you're doing business meetings. I think that's okay. Once I saw a problem for somebody who came to me where they had said, hey, I'm coming as a tourist. And then they did all those types of activities, and then they applied for an E2 and they got denied for fraud. So you don't want to lie about it not being a business trip.
And I see hiring people different as managing people, right? So you're making offers.
Yeah.
So I think you can make that distinction.
Yeah.
So I think it's something, conceivable. I did hear USCIS say on a recent webinar I was listening to that they are going to be providing some more guidance by the end of 2023 on B1, B2 and what's permissible. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. Oh my God, we'll need it. Yeah, I get really nervous when somebody only has a Delaware C corporation and then their LinkedIn says they're the CEO of this US company, and then they claim that they're only coming here on a business trip. But I think that's where it could get iffy at the
Yes, I agree.
or the visa interview.
Yeah, there's no foreign anchor. Yeah.
And we have a great podcast. Alex, if you can find the link to the podcast I did with Mandy Feuerbacher when she was at Argo, because she and I had like a long Q&A from a former consular officer perspective on what activities are permissible. And it was kind of funny to me because her interpretation was way looser than mine. And I was like, what about this law? What about this law? And she's like, but they're coming for business. So listen to that. And you can see even within the realm of practitioners and decision makers, there's a huge amount of gray area here. Okay. And the question about the recording, everybody's going to get this. Alex is going to email you the link to when it's on YouTube tomorrow. And then Alex, if you can please put that Mandy podcast link in the chat window, we would appreciate it. And then question about L1, is the new office L1 a tougher process? What do you think, Lynda?
I mean, a short answer, yes, there's more documentation because you don't have the operation activity, but I think the paper trail becomes even more important. And we also say, get a business plan. We recommend you have a business plan, but set realistic business goals because you're going to be filing, you're only getting a 1-year L. At the end of 1 year, you need to file for an extension. So don't say you're going to hire 50 people. Maybe it's 5 people, and then show that you met that goal or you came close to that goal when you go to file the extension.
Yeah, set reasonable, attainable expectations so that you can renew because they'll hold you accountable to your prior goals. Exactly. Okay, and then next question. This is actually about an H-1B, somebody who got selected and wants to do stamping and needs to know if they need to go through the lottery again. I don't know if we can briefly answer that. I think if you were previously accounted towards the lottery, then you can either activate the old H-1B if it got approved, if you still have a role at that company, or you can potentially transfer it to a new company. But
yeah, it's a little bit of a gray area. I think we'd have to look at the specific circumstances.
Yeah, and then is a PEO with a new office L1 possible? We work with some of the PEOs that you may have heard of, and they would need to agree to sponsor the L1 for you, and they might not qualify for the new office rules. So this is a very fact-specific question. But you guys should just contact us and we will be sending you all the information. Alex was amazing. She put the links to those podcasts that we talked about in the chat window. She's also going to email those to everyone along with the recording. But seriously, if you guys are thinking of expanding your operations to the US and you want us to assess yourself or any of your candidates, we will be so happy to do that. You can just email us hello@alcorn.law. Get some time on the calendar with Lynda or Nadia, who are experts on L's and E's. And then I guess final question, E2 visa not open for Indians, elaborate. Yeah, it's all racist. I'm sorry. We have a really messed up immigration system. That's the bottom line. If a person born in India immigrates to Canada and gets Canadian citizenship, then they qualify, or in Australia, for example. But it's based on country of citizenship, and if your country had a treaty with the United States. And there's no treaty between the US and India right now for E2 visas. So sorry. Okay, but that's it. Thank you so much for everybody for listening and attending today. We appreciate you being here. We would love to support you. We'll email you all of that information, and we look forward to supporting you on the journey. And thanks so much for staying tuned, and let us know if this was helpful to you today.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lynda. Thanks,
Bye.
Alex. Bye, everybody.